Thank you, everyone. Okay, so tell me how much louder should I be? No, not people on the here. I know. Can you hear me there or not? Okay. I will just push microphone in my head, basically. Okay. So yes, thank you, everyone, and good day for me, apparently. So thank you again for inviting me. It's my first time in this city and in this country as well. I think this is the most Nordic spot I've ever been. This is also interesting. And yeah, you don't have a lot of sun, which is I noticed that today.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm sorry. Okay.
Spoiled.
Okay. So yes, my name is Mariam Naiem, and I put it there. It should have been much bigger, but I didn't know that the projector will be. I thought it would be bigger. Anyways, my name is Mariam Naiem, and I think it will be much better if we will start everything with sharing our plan of the discussion today.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I will do some strange things with my head because we don't have a clicker. So I have like old don't do now, I'm just imitating. So that means, clicker. Okay, so yeah, what will we discuss today? So firstly, I will do the introduction. I need to explain who am I, why I'm here to speak, and why I'm doing all of those awkward jokes. Second, we will talk a little bit about types of colonialism, overseas and settler colonialism. Again, I won't spend a lot of time to discuss those two topics, but I will just try to give a bit of the explanation why exactly not everyone perceives Russia as an imperialistic country. We will also talk why actually colonialism needs imperialism, or why countries like Russia needs imperialism. After that, we will talk about the image of Ukrainians in Russian culture. This is the most painful part for all Ukrainians, so you can be triggered here, but yeah, for last 10 years we were triggered a lot, so we're used to that. And last part will be about the need of decolonization, and we'll talk about a little bit about that. The end will be about the questions. So let's start the introduction. Perfect. Okay, so who am I? First, I need to introduce. So I am independent. Firstly, my first part of the title right now is independent researcher in cultural studies. But war changed my life twice. After studying cultural studies and completing my bachelor degree, I devoted myself to art, and I hold several solo exhibitions. Yeah, and basically I was kind of doing art from the very beginning of my childhood, so it was part of my identity for a long time. But at some point in 2016, my brother Masi, who was born in Afghanistan, and he was brought to Ukraine when he was 5, he was drafted. And I stopped painting after that. Art became impossible for me. I of course, here I could make a little TED speech about why it became impossible, but I think it just simply, I just couldn't do that. Like every time I started to draw again, I just felt a lot of anxiety, and it was not possible for me to draw, so I just stopped to do that. After that, I need to continue, do something. So when my brother returned from the war that only Ukrainians believed was real, because others were calling that conflict, I started to work more like educator. I was giving a lot of lectures on popular culture topics, because it's my main academic research is popular culture. But to feed myself, I started to work as a UX designer, UX researcher. This is something in IT language. I just, again, need to eat something. And my life changed a lot second time with the full-scale invasion. So before that, I was having my normal job, we're just giving some popular cultural topics, lectures about Harry Potter, about Game of Thrones, because again, popular culture is my main interest. But again, something changed, and this something is full-scale invasion. Yes, and after that, suddenly, I start to talk about something else. Suddenly, all worlds start to believe that this world is real. And while continuing my UX work, I began speaking about war's colonial nature, unexpectedly leading me to Harvard. So two truths emerge. I wouldn't be here if not for Russia, because of Russia. And Russia has forced most Ukrainians to change their life completely. Also, for example, my brother as well, who fled from Soviet bombs in Kabul, fought in 2016 and again in 2022 when he lost an eye, and yet he's still in the war zone. Sometimes, not full time, but sometimes he's in the war zone. So that's why it was so hard to make an introduction, because again, right now life of a lot of Ukrainians changing rapidly, and I think it's one of the adaptive mechanisms of our mentality as a human species, just to adapt to know new skills and use them in a moment of need. What is also important, why author also part of introduction, because I was writing a lot of articles on various topics throughout my life. I kind of like to do a lot of experiments on me, on society, and on the perception. A lot of the time I was trying to figure out my identity. This is a picture from the time when I was wearing in fully, mostly Christian Ukraine. I was wearing hijab just to try to understand how will I feel in this society and how society will basically try to integrate or like communicate with me. And I was doing that time, I was doing notes every day and try to understand what do I feel. But it's also important that it's not only one experiment that I was doing. And once I decided, I think it was 2020. Yes, in 2020, I decided it was COVID. A lot of time to think. I decided to immerse myself in Russian propaganda for 1 month. I decided to listen only to Russian TV, and that's should have been my only source of information. The reason why I wanted to do that is because during the occupation, one of the Russians' first action was to cut all the independent information, not only independent, just any source of information from Ukrainians. And this tactic used both in captured cities and also with individual prisoners. So since in 2020, it was already 66 years of occupation Ukrainian cities by Russians, I wanted to think about or just try to understand what, how propaganda, even for like 1 month or 1 week, can change my perception. What I would start to think after a while. Just some updates. Firstly, I never published that article because it was too much. Secondly, I think at least only for 2 weeks I was writing notes every day. I was writing diary about that. And I remember a day when I realized, okay, I'm not doing that anymore. I was doing, when you listen to something and you do like your chores every day. So I was vacuum cleaning. And it's important to understand that this is the way how propaganda works very often when you are listening to that as a passive listener. So again, if you are listening to that and thinking and you are analyzing each word, you kind of try to understand, okay, yes, this is propaganda, but if you start to live in your life and have something in the background, at some point your cautious is not working anymore, so you are more exposed to propaganda. So I was vacuum cleaning and I was listening to the someone else's voice who were saying something about that it's very important that countries who have vaccine will share with others, and I was like, oh yeah, that sounds reasonable. And voice were continuing that it's also important to understand that technologies should be shared by everyone, and I was like, yeah, sure, that dude is right, and I'm like, okay, that dude is Putin. And I remember I stopped vacuum cleaning, I sat on the couch and I was like, okay, and that was 1 week. So I realized that, yes, apparently even 1 week, even if your like family members are on the front line, it can have impact on you. So, but why I'm talking about that? Trying to kind of feel better after that experiment, I decided to read Eva Thompson's book, Imperial Knowledge. And that was the first time when I started to understand the source of Russian aggression. I will read all of the slides. I remember that idea of reading all the slides became important for me. I would start doing that from the very beginning of my career, because one of my friends, she couldn't see very well, and after that it was kind of part of my my presentation always to read something if there is a lot of text. So furthermore, it is noted that it is necessary to distinguish between defensive nationalism, which is based on the protection of national identity, and aggressive nationalism, aimed to exporting one's national identity and conquering lands inhabited by others. That time, approximately, already some international media was talking about Ukrainian nationalism as a problem, which was very, very strange for Ukrainians because it was never the problem. So the biggest, how you can measure if some political ideas became dangerous, or how powerful they are. You can look by the representation in the political parties, and we didn't have any representation of political parties with nationalistic ideas. We had some, but they basically were less than 1% or 1.5%. So that part was interesting, and Eva Thompson continues that Russian nationalism is both aggressive and defensive, and this aggressive variety has transformed into imperial aspiration to colonize lands adjacent to ethnic Russian territories. So that was very meaningful for me to hear, to read, because during my cultural studies education, we never explored colonialism, particularly Russian colonialism. And this was the first time I truly understood what had been happening to us throughout the history. While many Ukrainian authors have researched this topic extensively, and I'm very grateful that their works finally gaining wider recognition right now. So, colonialism has existed throughout human history, when some societies absorbed and assimilated by neighboring ones. By 16th century, everything changed radically, and technical progress made it possible to visit the most remote corners of the planet, and at the same time relocate people across oceans without losing political control. That led to the largest colonial empires in history, such as British, French, Spanish, and Portuguese. And so during that, those examples of colonialism, the enslaved were predominantly non-white societies. And because of this, for a long time in academic circles, there was a stereotype that only people of color suffered from colonialism. However, modern researchers emphasize that colonialism is primarily about a system of enslavement, subjugation, and control, rather than only about geography or skin color. So this is interesting. You have this word overseas, and I don't have it on my slides. Anyways, yes. So this is a kind of example of very easy explanation what is overseas theory. So basically, you have the empire, a very, 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 very small, Great Britain, and you're going all the way somewhere down or somewhere south or somewhere not north typically in Great Britain, and you enslave someone or subjugate, and this is how you basically create a new colony. And also, what is important, I think it was Volodymyr Yermolenko who told it several days ago. Typically, a lot of known colonies had very specific date of colonization, the date when empire came and said, okay, you had your past, and now you will have our future, or we will give you our future, or you won't have your future, it will be ours. What is also important, nobody from Great Britain will never called anyone from India Englishman. This is not expanding of understanding what does it mean to be English. But something different happens when you talk about settler colonialism. But before that, yeah, so basically this is one of the reasons why some people don't perceive, and maybe that's why we didn't have so many talks about Russia being empire that basically had and has colonies right now. Also important to highlight that Britain also had colonies, but close to the country. So it's not always about being somewhere far away, somewhere overseas. And here you can see, I did very specific map with the Russian flags, trying to explain that with settler colonialism, you basically expand the idea of being you if you are the empire.
Definitely some Russian bug.
Yeah. Right, okay. So territory of this state expanded through wars, annexation, and diplomatic maneuvers that were not only different from overseas adventures of Western European states. So, but it's also important to understand that I think one of the reasons why it's not so typical to talk about Russia when we talk about colonialism, it's also connected to the Soviet times. Since a Soviet country was trying to portray itself as a very anti-imperialistic, why I'm trying to make like a sarcastic word trying is because, yes, basically they were using a lot of different ways to show that they are very anti or opposite of US situation. There is very interesting on YouTube, you can find it, cartoon, and the name of the cartoon is the Tale of African, or African Tale. It has English subtitles, and I think it's 50s, and it's kind of an example of how, the tale is about African man building a house, and after that, capitalistic elephant, capitalistic giraffe, and some other creatures. They basically come and they try to destroy African house, and the way how African person is portrayed in Soviet cartoon, you can also kind of remember how exactly African people were portrayed in American cartoons, and you will see the difference. And they were trying, and Soviet people was trying to, Soviet propaganda was trying to highlight that difference. That for sure they had so much respect over people of different colors. But again, this was also part of the propaganda, because inside of a Soviet state, there were a lot of different people with different, people of color, but of course they were subjugated all the time. And if you were ever talk to people from different post-Soviet republics, you will hear that all of them were basically will say the same. I remember I was talking to one volunteer from Kazakhstan, and basically we had, climate is very different. Our countries are very far away from each other. We had completely different languages, also not the same religion, geography is different, but we still were able to talk about the same Russian TV shows that we were watching together. There is some similarities, and I think that's why it's very important to maybe talk about this, about Russian colonialism, with specifically people who are connected to with Russia throughout the history. So with Russian colonialism, what is important to remember that you basically expand understanding of the word Russian. Joke, and we can, should we? No. Yeah, so basically, again, what we should remember, that colonialism is, first of all, it's practice of subjugation and controlling some people by others. Some exercise political control, you can, by seizure of the territories, of a military, but also throughout bribing certain people for further penetration into the colony. It could be also administrative control. Someone exercise economic control of the colony. Economic serves to the empire. Moreover, you cannot trade with whom you want. You basically sometimes can have, you basically kind of independent, but at the same time you're fully economically controlled by someone else. You can, again, in the Ukrainian history, you also were part of that that type of colony, and also social and cultural control, that destroying culture and languages or reducing their influence. A lot of people who somehow neighboring Russia, they are bilingual. How did that happen? I'm always trying to highlight that my bilingualism is not the chosen one. This is not something that I was like, okay, now I think it will be nice for my brain to think into languages. This is not something that somebody asked me. In those regions, people were at least speaking two languages. And one considered the language of the village, the other more intellectual one. Also, popular artists that perform from that country, they're typically somehow broadcasted in your country, and this is also became part of your culture. There is also very important way how another country treats your country. I'm also trying to say that neo-colonialism is a colonialism when you are basically not using military force, you can just use economical control. I'm always trying to say that you feel that kind of imperialism as a passive-aggressive behavior in the relationship. It's not very easy to cut it, but you always feel it, and that's why it's also much more complicated when you try to describe it to someone else, because you feel that, but it's much harder to explain. So, yeah, I think we also need to understand why or how. I think, yeah, it's more important how. So we kind of understood that there is colonialism, but of course there is imperialism, and it's a very important part of colonialism. The difference is, according to Adversite, is that colonialism is the policy, imperialism is the way of thinking. So basically, in order to allow yourself to go to another country to kill, to steal, you need to have feeling that you have a right for that, and this is imperialism. And that is fully myth that you need to create by a lot of different ways. And firstly, you create it by culture, by people of culture. You create the idea of greatness. As a person who studied culture, I can assure you that when you study culture, you never read anything as great culture and not so great culture. There is no such a thing as, you never play with this great or not great culture. Cultures are there, they're important, that's it. There are aggressive cultures, or culture kind of, use imperialism or subjugation, and there is just, and again, there is no sort of thing, you never compare which culture is greater. But somehow great culture is very typical synonym of imperialistic culture. I don't know how did it happen. Again, it's sarcasm. So that's why it's very important to understand that imperialism is something that imperialists need to believe himself. Otherwise, that won't work. And another, I think, part of imperialism, there need to be ears to listen to your propaganda. you also need to explain to everyone else that you are great. Otherwise, you won't believe in that, and otherwise, others won't believe in that. And very often, imperialism is connected to the idea of portraying others by not so cool. I like that this quote of Fanon. The colonist makes history. His life is an epic, an odyssey. He's invested with the very beginning. We made this land. He's the guarantor for its existence. If we leave, all will be lost, and this land will return to the Dark Ages. Important thing is that a lot of empires or imperialists were using words civilized, or we are civilizing, or we are sharing civilization. In relationship with Russia, civilization typically is a synonym of Russian language. So by being civilized, it means basically no Russian language. One of the favorite quotes of Russian ethnographers was that nobody who is not crazy, everyone who is not crazy want to know Russian language, because it's basically, this is the progress, this is how you became civilized. And this is how basically, what basically empires were doing. They were trying to civilize you, and if you were not want to be civilized, they will kill you. This is, the way of civilization. And second, that colonist makes history, and he knows it. This is a very important thing to understand how we have sources of the information, who created the story that we are reading. For Ukrainians, it's also important who created the story that we are reading about ourselves. This is the main phrase from that quote, and I want to go to second part of our lecture today. Is basically how, so we need to understand that it's very clear that small nation, a nation fighting for liberation cannot compete with these hundreds and thousands of books that were created by colonists. So in situation like Ukraine, it's very important to understand that. And I guess this was Volodymyr Yermolenko's quote. In situation with Russia, when they were colonizing, they were saying, "You don't your future is ours, but your past is also ours." That's why our history or understanding of our identity is much more complicated, and that's why I was trying to understand why we do have that inferiority complex, because for sure, unfortunately, we do. And I started to search for information, and I found out a lot of interesting Russian ethnographers, and I kind of traced that a lot of stereotypes about Ukrainians, they were there even in 18th, in 19th century. So now is the second part where I will quote, and I kind of basically will give you main groups of stereotypes that were created by different Russian ethnographers. From, I think it was 8 of them. I read all of those books. So you don't have this need to do that. Just trust me. So basically, to the large extent, they became the basis for the image of a Ukrainian that is now used by Russian propaganda. Even before, it was not even used by, not only by Russian propaganda. It was, sometimes you have this feeling that something is just there. As a person who studies culture, there's nothing there. Somebody put it there, so you will think that this is just there. So a lot of the words or adjectives about Ukrainians, we felt like they are just there, but it's There was very specific roots for that. So I suggest thinking about Russian stereotyping of Ukrainians in terms of two stages. First is romantic, and that image is before 20th century. Okay, it just sounds romantic, but it's not romantic. And the second is more it's more connected to the being a traitor, and that twist happened in 20th century, and that also works until now. So we'll talk about both. So in 18th and 19th century, in Russian Empire, there was a wave of interest to Ukrainian culture due to the ideas of romanticism. During that time, Ukraine is viewed as a Russian Scotland. That's the quote. Ukrainians became romantic heroes, but it also was objectified, and of course that idealization was more idealization of someone who is basically uncivilized. Basically uncivilized, and I think it will be just better if I will show you the quotes. But most of the time it's simple-minded, rude, and educated, and connected to the nature. But let's talk about some of them. The first big part of the stereotypes, and it's musicality, and they love to sing. So on purpose, I didn't put the author for each quote here. I can tell you their names. I don't have any problems with that. I just felt like it's a bit off. I didn't want to be there, here, and their names there. Somehow for me it was a bit weird. So, anyways, the first is it's made by Pavel Petrovich Svinin. He was a Russian writer, and he wrote a big work about Ukraine, pictures of Russia, they call it. So the ability of little Russians, Ukrainians, this is important part. Little Russians. Nice to meet you. I'm Little Russian. So there are idea of Russia being so great that there's three main Russian nations inside of the Russia. Great Russians, Little Russians, and Belarusian. I think you can understand the connection. So you will, most of the time they refer to Ukrainians as a Little Russians, so now you know. And of course, in Ukrainian nobody uses that. In Russian it's Maloros, and of course this is like a slur for Ukrainian. I remember I once posted one of those quotes on Instagram as an example of how Russians were talking about us, and Instagram banned me for slur, and I was like, this is a bit annoying. The ability of Little Russians for singing and music is amazing. It is known that our best singers are mostly from Little Russia, which in this regard is just called Russian Italy. Russian Italy, Russian Scotland, you get it. The pleasantness of the voices that they have suppressed almost all inhabitants of Russia. Ukrainians love to sing more than any other country in the world. I would like to see the data for that. The Nightingale. If somebody don't see that from the background, you can also make a picture or make a photo of that if you need that. The second part of the stereotypes is that they are connected to nature. Little Russian is the same little childlike people as a Great Russian, but with an even more childlike relationship to life and its phenomena. Little Russians is more a child of a nation than the Great Russian. The Great Russian is a more practical, materialistic. The South Russian is more idealistic, and therefore the latter has more developed spiritual side of life, poetry. I think yes. That work is even name of that work. The author is Vladimir. It's the Guide to Study of Russian Population. And the last quote is Little Russian. It seems something
feel beauty in architecture. Their taste is quite well formed by nature. So basically, if we will connect musicality and connect it to nature, we will have this. We have Disney princess. They're also not very smart, and they try to portray it first. Of course, I also had the lecture about Disney princesses, and to be honest, there is a waves of Disney princesses, and right now the stereotype of not very educated girl without mother who's singing a lot, don't have friends, and have birds. This is like a first wave of portraying of Disney princesses, and they basically don't have any personality. Cinderella, Sleeping Beauty, and Snow White, they are basically the same, just with different hairstyles. And Ukrainians are basically the same, because they also like to sing and connect to nature. But of course there are others explanation of the. So Ukrainians basically are like very slow and phlegmatic. The phlegmatic carefreeness seems to serve as a protection and barrier from restless turbulence. Judging by their silence and slow movement, this is very interesting how they try to portray. But it's also important to understand that most of the ethnographers that just start the ethnography, they were racist. Like, it was a very based line to be ethnographer. You need to be racist, and after that you do something. Now it's not like that. The little Russian is immobile, slow, looks somewhat from under his brows. Yes, next one. Comicality. So we basically find, here I would like to part this. The comic side of which Mr. Turgenev he portrayed as if it was enough for Khokhol. Khokhol is another slur. You will know after this lecture a lot of important information. I think it's hard for me to say which is worse, but yeah, I think that's worse than Little Russian. So for Khokhol to take bandura in his hand and sing "Граю, граю, воропаю," and he would immediately start crying. I'm very happy that there is no bandura here. The sensitivity of Little Russians has even become the object of mockery. Little Russians, and especially women, are easily moved to tears. Of course, especially women. So you need to be racist and sexist, but again, this is normal. Sorrowful story, a sad song will always evoke a series of deep sighs and more than one tear of warm sympathy for which suffers, which is wronged, which cries itself. Edward Said wrote a very interesting and very important work about imperialism and colonialism. Name is Orientalism, a lot of isms. The main, and why I like this book is also because if you read first 40 pages, it's basically a whole book. Like, he explained his main ideas first 40 pages, and after that he just, for the next 200 pages, he just gave examples of his points, which again I think saves your time if you're interested. His main idea that how people or culture, or West culture, was trying to portray a lot of Eastern cultures, and he was trying to explain that there is East and there is Orient, and it's not the same, because East is about geographical place and Orient is about symbols or images. That Orient could be something not geographically on East, like from East parts of on East part of Europe. It could be anywhere else, because for a lot of people, East it's somewhere there. This is the best explanation for that. And I remember I was thinking about that while I was reading those quotes, next quotes. Something Asian. Again, if you need geography, Ukraine on the west part. So we're more west than Russia. Even though, anyways, Russian ethnographers were trying to say that we actually have a lot of something Asian in how do we look. Something from Tatar, something from Turks. That like Ukrainians are black eyes, often brown facial features, They're always energetic, large, and expressive. It's also interesting how that was connected to being slow. Yeah. Also important part that you can see that in the second quote. Little Russians are more similar to the luxurious inhabitants of Asia, but do not have the violent, which connected to Islam, of course. This is the connection for violence. That was very interesting because, again, that's kind of highlight the point of Said, is that Orient is not only something on the East. And so all of what you were seeing right now is actually very similar of how, for example, for a long time, a portrait of Native American was created in Hollywood. They're also very like nature-oriented, very spiritual. Women were always like more exotic, more interesting. They also do not like order. They also do not. They basically cannot create a country and cannot create a nation. And this is another part of the stereotypes about Ukrainians that with trying used this idea that Ukrainians are not separate nations, separate people who cannot be even separate because we basically cannot. We are too chaotic. But nevertheless, at some point, I remember it was, I think it was, yes, it was Sevenin. In one of his books, he wrote something like, typically Ukrainians don't like Russians, but roots for that we need to search in history, and it's too complicated right now. This was the end of the sentence. And that's true, it's for sure roots are in history. But at some point, specifically in the beginning of 20th century, there were another new trait of Ukrainians, basically as a people who are traitors. So when characterizing the moral quality of little Russians, the proper place must be given to the historically formed nation of Ukrainian as a secretive and cunning. So yes, that part this is exactly the moment when we can discuss why we start to see or portray Ukrainians as traitors. Because of the beginning of 20th century, Ukraine experienced a period of rapid independence before becoming part of the USSR, and this thirst for political independence adds this new attribute to the existing stereotype: Ukrainians are traitors, and that stereotypes were also there in Soviet time and of course in modern Russia as well. So this is quote from White Guard of Bulgakov. Of course, there could be no question of Matryoshka being a traitor. In no case an intelligent person, and even more gentleman, who signed bills for 75,000 and sent telegrams in 63 words can be on the side of Petlura. Petlura was also very important. He was a Ukrainian military and political leader who fought for Ukraine independence during 1917 and 1921. And a lot of Russian imperialists opposed him because he led Ukrainian People's Republic and actively fought against both white and red Russian forces who wanted to keep Ukraine under Russian control. So that part in Soviet time changed a bit of that form, because in Soviet time movies start to be part of Russian propaganda, and for sure they were trying to show, trying to give Ukraine a little bit different role. So most of the time, I think the best example of role of different nations under Soviet control would be that. We were discussing with my friend one book about geography, basically, from Soviet times, and it was kind of big yellow atlas, and when you open that, you could see a lot of people from different from different nations, different ethnicities from Soviet time, and they were wearing their ethnic clothes. So all of them were wearing ethnic clothes except Russian. Russian just looked normal. So normal is, this is how you know you're Russian. So, and in Soviet movies, very often Ukrainian men or Ukrainian people, heroes who were Ukrainian, they were best friends of Russian. They were also tried to portray it as the basically of course the first friend of Russian protagonist will be Ukrainian, but there are also one part of the culture that was connected to jokes, anecdotes, and this is next slide is another example of the anecdotal culture. Is that one Ukrainian is perpetrator, two Ukrainians are partisan squad, three Ukrainians are the partisan squad with a traitor. This is something that again we're trying to imply in Ukrainians a lot, that there is no unity, there is only like you cannot trust Ukrainians. So even though some of these stereotypes might look innocent, this is a typical imperialistic point of view on the colonized culture. The derogatory top-down view, which with a lot of prejudice and a lot of those romantic stereotypes, they became basic basically for Ukrainophobia. How quickly then using our uneducated natural people became savages and traitors when they dared to reject the sacred Russian culture and have their own history. And now I think we can talk a bit of the decolonization. So basically, at some point society decided that enough is enough. And some scholars call that decolonial catharsis. So it's basically resistance to colonialism, and this is the moment for society to understand that that could not be the way it was. For my opinion, for Ukrainian history of Ukrainian independence, that moment started in 2013 with the Revolution of Dignity, and yeah, I like that photo a lot because I think important part of the Revolution of Dignity that it was not political revolution. There were no political statements from the political party. It was more or less value revolution. And every time I look at this picture, I'm thinking, that those people came there because of the value. That's something differently. So only now we start to discuss how exactly we saw ourselves through the history. Even for the last 30 years of the independence, it's also important to highlight that most of the time, Ukrainian television, for example, didn't had enough of the money to create its own TV shows. So we were buying Russian TV shows where Ukrainians were portrayed as, singing nature, stupid, and so on. And only now we are start to understand who are we and what exactly we want to be. And that's why I think it's so important to understand how we were basically also gaslighted through the history. Important part of the talk today is that, and I didn't, I put for that specifically different slide. The quote of Belinsky, and this is it was another group of stereotypes about Ukrainians, that Little Russia has never been a state, and consequently it has no history in a strict sense of the word. And I just want to compare this word to this word. Almost 200 years, and they're basically using the same narrative. So the main ideas of the topic today is that Russian current aggression against Ukraine is not a new phenomenon, but rather a continuation of centuries-old colonial practice. Imperial stereotypes that have persisted through the time, the image of Ukrainians as a natural but uncivilized people, the patronizing notion of the younger brother requiring guidance, and finally the hostile portrayal of irrational traitors of Russian civilization. And this pattern of Russian colonialism toward Ukraine follows classical imperialist trajectories, from romanticization through infantilization, culminating in demonization, and the colonial control is challenged. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That's been exactly 1 hour, and we're happy to move to questions. Okay, so if we have
You can put the next slide.
next slide.
Just trust me.
Bye.
If you want to read something, you can do the QR code.
Right. Yeah, I will just 1, 2. Yes, you first. Yes, just try to speak up.
Okay, yeah. Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Tamar. I'm from Georgia, and I'm researching actually some conspiracy theories and propaganda. So some of these things were very relevant for Georgia as well, like creating the images and so on. But my question is related to your experiment of watching propaganda for 1 month, which is stopped in the middle of the way. So I'm interested, what were your feelings? Like, what kind of, did you have some kind of behavior changes, or why you stopped? Did you feel like scared also in a way that you could be actually under the propaganda, or?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Yes, basically I stopped because I was scared what could happen after 1 week. So no, I think it will be more honest if I will say that way. The moment when I thought that dude was right and that guy was Putin, I was so scared that thing was even there in my mind after 1 week. And I was doing that specifically 45 minutes each day on the background by doing something. And I realized that firstly I won't judge anyone who were ever under Russian occupation, because I cannot do that. And secondly, I decided that I don't want to do that anymore, because lesson was learned already.
Thank you very much. It's actually very interesting.
Thank you. Thank you.
There was another question there.
Thank you. Thank you for your lecture, and thank you for coming here. My name is Harold, and I'm a student at Uppsala University. You were naming The Orientalist by Edward Said, and like you said, the first 40 pages are the introduction, the next 100 pages are the examples. And one downside of it is some of them are over-exaggerated, so he puts in more racist than in some of the racist lines, more racist than there were in the other part, which is more important. The other part is one dimension focused on the Western colonial powers, which has made many of us, like you said, blind for other imperialist powers. And sometimes isn't there a consequence when, let's say, Russians and even, let's say, Chinese say, no, we were colonial, we were exposed by colonialism, and that makes also our anti-racist opinions in just good heart. We are just believing it, and without forgetting that many of the new leaders or new elites that use the terms often have their own empirical history.
This is the question.
No, sorry,
Thank you. I mean, yes, I think it's actually there is Eva Thompson essay. It is colonialism after all, where she is trying to describe exactly that problem. They're trying to explain that a lot of let's call it that way, like more left-oriented intellectuals they were not perceived. We're not perceiving Russia as an imperialistic state, and there is a lot of different reasons for it. And of course, part of that is a Soviet propaganda. But yes, I agree that focusing specifically on only one. Basically what you said, and I agree on that. It's basically the main criticism of the Edward Said book, and this is another section after. If you will buy a book right now, there's another section of the criticism that you should not think that everything that's there is completely 100% true. But I think that prism is very important, and even now, as a not white Ukrainian, Afghan origin, I know exactly that a lot of, unfortunately, orientalistic prisms are still there. So, yeah.
When you were reading, about what a lot of these Russian ethnographers were writing about Ukrainians, did you read any portrayals of how they saw women?
Yes.
Ukrainian women?
Yes.
Because I know that in Orientalism, women who are exotic are seen as inherently more sexual or objectified. Was this kind of opinion also written about by these Russians?
Okay, I will try to. Okay, so there were actually a lot, of course, because you can imagine there were a lot of different things that I didn't explain. But yes, they were saying that firstly, what I will try to explain right now, it's not actually works at the Orientalistic paradigm, but I will try to convey the difference that they notice. First thing that they say that it's very interesting that Ukrainians are more independent oriented because after Russian family, like Russian son get married, family emerged in one house. In Ukraine, what they were saying that were not happening, so family start to live separately. One of the reasons for that, that led to the fact that Ukrainian women were more independent. And my favorite thing was that one guy was writing that Ukrainian women are beaten much less. Mm-hmm. And there was a joke of like Ukrainian guy went to court because his wife beaten him, and in the court he say basically the outcome of the court, he said, "Sorry, wife, that I was behaving so bad and you beat me." So that was the joke. So yeah, they were also saying that Ukrainian women are physically bigger, like they look bigger, but I didn't notice that they were sexualized in 19th century. They were sexualized though in modern times. So for example, when I can give you 100 examples of popular culture, how like Ukrainian being an exotic girl that always hot and always. But this is also part. I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to focus on something else. But this is also part of how did they portray Ukrainian women from the Hollywood side. The idea of Ukrainian women, being there is a meme that's quite popular. Is like Fiona from Shrek, and Fiona being a princess. And joke is like average Slavic guy and Slavic girl. That woman is always beautiful, always overdressed, always sexualized, and that thing, for sure, were there in Russia in the end of 20th century, and of course, for sure, while being independent.
Okay.
I'm interested in that 1 month when you only listen to propaganda. Because you said what happened after 1 week when you were back. What happened after 1 month?
So I was reading much more. So I stopped to listen. I started to read more. I just, and that's completely different because while you're reading, you are still analyzing. You start to see the sentence, the adjective. You start to notice the hints of the sentence. So that's why, if you want to be, if I could be very honest, that's why I realized I don't like podcasts, to be honest, because for me it's very important that you know exactly when and how did you get some information. So after 1 month, basically nothing changed because I was like already reading, and I was too shocked after that 1 week. But it's also important that I was not so the idea was not only Russian propaganda, but also just Russian news. So most of the time it was Russian propaganda, and sometimes it was just Russian news, like Russian.
Is there a difference?
I mean, okay. Again, being honest, of course, if you read, if you listen to Russia, because even now I'm listening to what they're saying about, because it's very interesting. They, even right now when they're talking about war, sometimes they're trying to be very vague. They're trying to talking about war, but right now, through the whole Russian propaganda machine, they're always talking how it is important to give birth a lot of child. It's also important how they try to make this as a statement. We need more people, basically. Of course, that there is difference between that and Russian opposition channels, for example. But for sure, what you can feel as a similarity, there is the imperialism is a structural thing, and even if you could be anti-war, you could still be imperialistic. And we also know that there is a lot of cultures who actually don't have any colonies anymore, but they're still imperialistic and they still have imperialistic point of view. So I can agree on that, that most Russian news that I was listening, they were all imperialistic, yes. But some of them are thinking that we need to kill someone, someone think that they're just great.
Just for the fact that this experiment triggered a lot of questions, maybe you should start adding this claim, don't repeat dangerous, and it's like people need to
Yeah, that's why I didn't make it, yeah.
One more question? Yeah, go first.
Sorry, this is perhaps a better question. See, we have a saying in Swedish that's translated, we have degrees or hierarchies in hell, and since there have been probably a broad variety in the different prejudice in the Russian prejudice against Ukrainians, and if you could see some tendencies in the both ends, what defines the worst prejudice, and what defines the more may I say, more reasonable prejudice, or the more reasonable people that are prejudiced?
Okay.
What defines the prejudice themselves and the people who chose?
Okay, the most crazy, not crazy, the most reasonable one. Yes, I think we are very, we like to be independent, sure. They were trying to show that as Ukrainians being traitors of being a Russian nation. But for sure, I can see that as a Ukrainian citizen, that despite a lot of situations, we're still doing revolution and we're fighting for democracy. That thing, as a person who study culture, I do not believe in mentalities. I believe in social changes or social behaviors. That's why, I won't call it as a mentality, but for sure I can say that the Ukrainian need for independence and democracy, for me, is something that I like in our society the most, despite anything, like any odds. And the most crazy part, it's very great about hierarchy in hell, because there actually in Soviet time there were hierarchy. And on the top of that, of course, it was Russian. Ukrainian or Belarusian were, of course, beneath that. But there were a lot of other cultures that had much worse situation, and we're also facing that, and we're also talking about that. That people, the most typical jokes of Soviet time were about Chukchas, about the ethnicity in Russia, and of course it's not comparable. What they basically destroyed culture mostly. So yeah, I think for me one of the most unreasonable stereotype is the Ukrainians being more stupid than Russian. so they try to make this statement as Ukrainian is a smaller brother. He's a bit less smart, he's more stupid, and in 20th century he always started to be jealous. So I think that stereotypes is the most, because again, also saying that someone is stupid is just a typical way of subjugation. But yeah, I mean, if I could say so, that this is two opposite things that both of them are stereotypes for sure, because none of them did any qualitative data. But yeah, I think one is very, at least somehow connected to reality that I can see right now.
Yes, yes, yes.
Maybe just one remark that we were talking about like propaganda, but propaganda is not only like in just the news, like what is said, but as being Ukrainian, we were also like exposed, for example, to Russian TV series, and that's exactly what they're like priming you with the message that Ukrainians are like a little bit like a second-class citizen, always in the TVs and in the shows. So I think that's also a little bit like primes you, like reduces your self-esteem. Then maybe I've also a question, since you mentioned about this propaganda impact, and I, like living here, I can also even hear sometimes like some compassion towards Russians, saying like, oh, but they're like, you know, they're poor, they're like poisoned with propaganda. Right, great, but I mean, on the other hand, they're like aiming down on you, so how can you like, maybe there's like a good messaging we can like spread also in Europe, to like explain that yes, sure they're posed with propaganda, but it doesn't mean we can be like too compassionate towards them.
Mm-hmm. So firstly, about the first topic. So I have one big 40-minute lecture about one episode of one Russian TV show for 10 minutes, and analyzing how from the TV show they are trying to basically show that oligarchy is a normal thing. So if I actually prepared that, I thought we'll have more time, but apparently we don't. So yes, and that TV show is actually for kids. This is also important part. So completely agree. I mean, you know, in Nazi Germany, they figure out that television is a very important tool. Of course, they are using, and that is analyzing. I don't know how to translate KVN in English. KVN. No, it's club.
Comedy club. Comedy club.
Club Веселых. There was basically a comedy club in Soviet time, and it's of course it's also part of the Russian propaganda regime, and they are. And I was analyzing all the jokes that they did about Ukrainians through the 20 years. So yeah, there are a lot of things that we can discuss about popular culture. Yes, and I agree on that, and that's why I said that we were buying a lot of TV shows. This was the point of that. And while I was thinking about this TV show for kids, I forgot your question.
About compassion towards Russians, they're all victims of.
Okay, this is another problem. You see, I think as a Ukrainian, again, I will tell, as I like to say, I will talk as a Ukrainian, after that as a cultural studies person. As a Ukrainian, I have a lot of people to feel compassion to right now. Like there's so many of them, and I need to save my resources. And secondly, I think it's important to understand that you don't need to be in Russia to be exposed to Russian propaganda. You don't need to speak Russian in order to be again exposed to Russian propaganda. There was one very interesting study that they were saying that people who are watching TV, they're less exposed to propaganda because they do not trust TV. But people who are just using the social media, we have this illusion that social media it's my bubble, it's created by me. And actually, those people are more exposed to propaganda because they feel like they're safe. So I think this fake feeling of being safe is something that I think overall need to keep in mind. And for people who are, I think you can kind of understand someone's behavior, but I don't think you need to be apologetic of someone's, ideas. This is what I'm trying to answer in your question. Like, yes, for sure, there were some people who it was not their fault, but for sure there should be some work done from their side. And I remember I was discussing that with one French guy. Sorry for standing for so long. So I was trying to convey how you as a person from ex-colony, you are feeling lost. You don't know what are you, who are you? Like, this is a big question.
Ex-empire.
Sorry?
Ex-empire.
No, as a being ex-colony, like you, Ukrainians. So, and I was trying to describe that this is like feeling lost is very common for a lot of us, and we're trying to basically find ourselves. And one guy came to talk after the talk, and he was saying that I am from ex-empire and I feel the same. And I was like, okay, where are you from? He said that he's from France, and he said that I also don't know what is my culture without violence. And I felt sorry for him, but I was like, but I don't have enough of empathy to, empathize him. But it was interesting, and I kind of was thinking that this is Imperial Boomerang by Foucault. It's basically at some point the people in empire also will suffer from. I do not jealous any Russian person right now. I think it's very complicated identity, and I don't know what does it mean to be Russian. I don't know. But for sure, they need to do some. Being anti-war is not enough. I think it's very, very obvious that we need to understand that no matter what, you need to do some part of your job, and to understand the imperialistic roots of your culture is one of that.
There was a question there.
Yes. What is, in your view, what is the most common Russian imperialist viewpoint about Ukraine that is either accepted or relayed in Western media?
Oh wow, it felt painful. Okay, again, there is a lot. It's a big problem. It's a big problem because, of course, I don't like to say West. I don't like to say East. I like to be more precise. But nevertheless, we're using right now the word West. Unfortunately, I can feel like a lot of West media could be also imperialistic, seeing Ukrainians now are not educated, civilized enough, are too emotional, too traumatized. So, and I felt that a lot as a person who were talking about Ukraine. There was a lot of situation when war was discussed without Ukrainians because, quote, we didn't want this to be emotional. So, as emotion being something bad. Anyways, so I think the idea of Ukrainians being too emotional, too less rational, that thing for sure exists in the media. Yeah, the idea that, okay, sometimes when you talk to people, you feel it's just a feeling, that they assume that you don't get something. And I have this feeling all the time that I don't get something, that there is the truth and they know it. Okay, I will give you an example. I was talking to one journalist, and she was asking me what do I think about the new law that in Kyiv we cannot name any street after Russian authors. The journalist was German, and I was explaining to her all the reasons why we're doing that, not because we hate Russia culture. We want to focus on ourselves. It's important to understand that our behavior is not caused by hate of someone else, it's caused by being focused on us. And after that question, she was saying that her editor wanted to ask me, do I think that this is very scary that we're banning the culture? And I was trying to be very polite, and I said, can you ask the editor why he cares so much about Russian names and Ukrainian cities, but do not care what names after which Ukrainian author their street in Moscow. Why, or what do you need to do, what your culture need to do in order to be great? Who you need to erase? And of course that led to the question that I kind of make a hint that maybe that editor also had a bit imperialistic view of Ukraine. As a, there is a great culture, important culture, and there is just culture. There is Dostoevsky and there is Ukrainian authors. That's why I didn't name them, because there is a name and there is Ukrainian authors. So I have this feeling that there is an equal situation when people are thinking about the weight of Russian culture, and I don't want to say that we need to erase something and cancel, but at least we need to do the homework and understand the imperialism onto that. Why I'm saying that, because we had in Europe, for sure, we have a lot of imperialistic culture, but we didn't ban them. It's not very possible, but we analyzed them. And I think this is the, even in Churchill's museum, there is a Churchill museum that actually was made by his relatives. There is a big screen with the question, was Churchill a racist? Yes, but everyone was a racist. This was the answer. Even there, they did it homework. So I think it's important to do the homework. And yeah, that's that feeling that we didn't get something, we don't understand something. This is something that I feel very often.
Maybe a couple more questions.
Just remark on the same topic, because I moved to Sweden. I'm Ukrainian, but I lived in Moscow for some time. But when I moved to Sweden, and about what is the most painful thing, and I would say I'm Ukrainian, and everybody would say, oh, it's Russia. Right? So you have to remember that this Russian propaganda is not standing alone. It was built on the history of, as it was said earlier, but it's just passed on very quickly. Soviet and period Russian Empire. So Ukrainians are Ukrainians, we're not Russians. But in the eyes of many Europeans, it's Russians. Oh, you come from there, you're Russian. And that is not okay. And obviously any issue that's brought up now by Russian side, whatever, it's language or streets and anything. And yeah, but this is not an issue. Issue is people are dying because you're bombing them. This is an issue. I'm sorry, but
No, it's very. This is also, I think, important because I started to travel the moment when war started, so I never faced the situation when somebody was, thinking that we were Russian, because I started to travel after that. This is also kind of a hint that the distinction between us and Russian became after the full scale, which is a thing a bit sad, but this is, for sure it's true. And also even now I think it was I was in Berlin 5 days ago, and there was a very nice guy in the hotel in the check-in desk, and he asked me where I'm from. I said Ukraine. He's like, oh, здравствуйте, and I was like, okay, he wanted to be nice, and he said Russian word hello. And I was like, Jesus Christ. And I was there to do the talk about colonialism. I was like, okay, how I will manage that. And of course I politely said that this is not Ukraine. He's like, yeah, but I thought that your language is close. And I'm like, yeah, sure, okay. But yeah, this is, even when people are trying to be nice, sometimes they're doing that thing. And again, that's painful. I think overall it's not very nice, but that became unbelievably painful, specifically when you're like, have a notification of somebody died because of the, Russia, and after that, the same day, the same minute, you have this thing, you have this здравствуйте, this Russian word. That is very painful, because again, their dots are connected in one second, and you can see how all of that is around you, and it's complicated. But again, now I'm talking as a person, not a. as a person who's giving lecture.
Okay, one more question. Oh, and immediately let's collect them all, okay? And then we will get the stuff that's started here.
I want to talk, not really talk to you, but potentially after. But maybe you can talk a bit about multicultural background of Ukraine itself. So the reason, the difference why we talk about Russian multicultural background, like the way they collected it, and the difference, the historical difference of Ukrainian multicultural background. Maybe we can talk a bit about it. And for example, I'm from Crimea, I'm Ukrainian, from Crimea, and it's a bit interesting. I keep telling that when people tell me, "Oh, you're from Crimea, you're Russian. Are you Russian or Ukrainian?" "Oh, you're mostly Russian because you're part of Ukraine, been under Russian occupation for 11 years." But I keep telling okay, but who I am? I'm myself. This is the only part that I know, being Ukrainian, but I'm partly Polish. I'm partly Crimean Tatarian. I'm partly Finnish. I'm partly German. I'm partly Russian, but that part is actually interesting. When you go to that part, you understand they're partly Caucasian and partly German, and that part which is Russian. So by all these people, all my ancestors call themselves Russians in order to survive. But they're it's a multicultural background. And also, in the whole, you also have multicultural background, as far as I know. What can you tell about historical overview, maybe a bit, and about nowadays society, how it's formed?
Yeah, I think it's also kind of neat.
Is it okay if you just pause and we collect two more? Okay, I will remind you if that. So there was one question here and one there.
Oh.
You still?
Yeah,
Go for it.
sure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's another long question for you. Try to shorten it. Thank you for the speech. Beautiful. So propaganda is very much into the details. We have an expression on the Swedish, and we can say "Djävulen finns i detaljerna." The devil is in the details, and also propaganda works in the long perspective, and it's sophisticated in the great small nuances. So we have it in large part of Europe. Could you, to make it simple, could you elaborate a little bit on what you see of the Russian propaganda outside Ukraine?
Okay, I remember that. Thank you.
Okay. Yes, and in case someone should ask this.
I was more follow up on the previous question about the view of Ukraine in some Western media through the glasses of Russian propaganda. And I feel like it has gotten much better since the start of the war. So, even not on the media level just, but more on ground levels or people level, regular people, they kind of got a feeling what Russia really is, which they didn't before the war. Yes.
Yeah, so I will start. So, firstly, I think we need to understand that propaganda is not when it's something absurdly not true. It's not when Trump's saying that someone else is eating cats. This is not the only way how propaganda looks. Propaganda takes fact and makes something, create another layer of the cake. And this is important to understand that. And there is a lot of propaganda inside of the social media, much more, and it's much more nuanced than we were thinking. A couple of days ago, it's a very long story about website orwell.ru, but yeah, there were very interesting information that even some Ukrainian politicians were using something from the Russian website about past. This is just crazy. Amount of things that you need to check right now in order to know that you are saying true. It's horrible. I mean, not objective true, but just fact. This is true. This is much more complicated. But I think leading to the question, what is the most known? Yeah, this is the thing. Putin had his reasons. He's reasonable. He's a smart guy. this is idea of Putin being, it's also part of the problem of the popular culture. That's why I like the movie Jojo Rabbit, when they are describing, I'm referring like you watched that movie. Did you watch that movie? So they were portraying Hitler in very like a comical, like funny way. And I like that idea because for a long time when people were trying to show dictators, they were cool. They were bad, but they were cool. And this is the thing that I see a lot outside of Ukraine. Putin somehow feel like a tough guy. It's actually one of his propaganda is like being ordinary Joe, like being naked on the horse, using very masculine language. The idea of like he actually knows his stuff. This idea that there is something tough, something cool beside his sadism. When I talk about people outside of the bubble, I hear that very often, that for sure he had his reasons, like it could be explainable. And we can also just agree that nothing could explain genocide or war. So this is something that I notice very often, and that is like, that could be in any political spectrum. Like it's not only like very right people who are saying that. It's something that people genuinely believe that there should be a reason. Like, it's kind of a, for me it's reminds, oh my God, victim blaming. Like there should be a reason that caused that thing. That it could not be just because someone else is a basically crazy person. This thing. And about multiculturalism, I think it's important to highlight that when country of that size exists, that it's kind of obvious that it could not be one ethnicity there. It's too huge, and when country by this size became again one entity, it's kind of obvious that it was colonialism. Like it's very hard to be that huge country as Russia and do not have colonies. Of course, inside Russia there were so many different ethnicities and people look very different. So this is, of course, one part of their propaganda, and another. But this also leading to Soviet idea of multiculturalism, and Soviet idea of the being different under one nation. In Ukrainian situation is of course different because we have multicultural. We are a multicultural nation. But we predominantly white, but you got it. Predominant white society, and it's also something that sometimes pro-Russia propaganda is using, that Ukrainians look like blue eyes, blonde hair, and so on. So for sure, yes, in Ukraine we have a lot of. But this is idea that this is a we are civil, like we're a civil nation. Like you can have different ethnicities, but you are Ukrainian because being Ukrainian is a choice. It is something that you decide to be, rather than your ethnic roots. So that's why I think one of the reasons why in Ukraine we don't focus so much on the ethnic roots. That's why even if you're a refugee from Afghanistan, you can become member of parliament someday. It's not me. But related. And I don't think that in a lot of countries in Europe it's actually possible to be the first generation of refugee and became a member of parliament. So yeah, in Ukraine that multiculturalism look a bit different.